Hello, class, and welcome to Interviewing Techniques. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and this week we will be exploring the foundational principle of ethical and effective counseling, the whole idea of supporting client autonomy. Now, I know we've talked about this a lot, but now I want to kind of focus on some techniques and some principles that really are central to interviewing in counseling. Because autonomy means recognizing the client as the author of their own lives. It means trusting that they are capable of growth and of healing and decision making, even when they are unsure. And so, as we go through this lecture, hopefully it'll help you to understand how to reinforce autonomy through the counseling process, especially when working with addiction and particularly with ambivalence within addiction. So as always, within my lectures, I like to start off with a little story about an important person. And you know, I know I've talked about him before, but the person I'm going to talk about is important, particularly when it comes to client autonomy. And so we're going to revisit him to remind you of his work. And then we'll get into the three main themes of this lecture. The first one is about defining what it means for a client to have autonomy and how to value that autonomy. And then we'll move into some practical strategies for supporting autonomy within the counseling relationship and building some therapeutic rapport and honoring the personhood of the client. And then finally, we'll move into the important link between autonomy and honoring the client's autonomy and long-term lasting change, which is what we're really looking for, is true healing, not some kind of fake acting of healing, but something that is truly long-lasting and transformative in the person's life. So that's what we'll be taking a look at in this lecture. So let's move on, and I want to tell you about Carl Rogers. Grew up in, where was it? Rogers Park. Rogers Park? in a suburb of Chicago. No, not Rogers Park. Rogers Park is a different part of Chicago. He grew up in Forest Park, not Forest Park. River Forest, in the River Forest area of Chicago. He's on the west side of Chicago, anyways. And so Carl Rogers, born in 1902, died in 1987, and did a large degree of his studying at the University of Wisconsin. And kind of lived his life in that area of the world. And Rogers really kind of remains one of the most influential figures in counseling psychology. His client-centered approach really emphasizes the conditions necessary for personal growth. He really emphasized going slow and showing empathy, showing congruence to the client, and of course, giving the client the unconditional positive regard that every human being should have. And Rogers really believed that autonomy is at the heart of healing. When clients are given space to make choices and to reflect without judgment, they are more likely to experience lasting change. And so his legacy really does continue to inform every conversation where the counselor says, "I trust you to find your way." And so as we go through this, always remember to trust the process. The process of honoring empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard in the autonomy of the client is central to any therapeutic relationship. So what do we mean by client autonomy? It is the client's freedom to make decisions about their own life and their own recovery. And really, it is a simple existential truth that we all have that kind of responsibility within our lives. And so there is no real way around it authentically as a human being, but to honor the client's autonomy and simply acknowledging the fact that the client does have autonomy. The client has the freedom to make decisions about one's own life and recovery. And this involves personal agency, self-determination, and the right to choose, even when choices involve risk. And even when the client sometimes regrets the choices that they make. Counselors who respect autonomy don't take over. Rather, they walk beside. They enter into the client's lived world and help the client to live their best life within that world by allowing the client to make the choices within their lived world. So why does autonomy matter? And that is because clients with substance use history often report feeling controlled, feeling judged, feeling coerced. So when you respect their autonomy, it helps to rebuild that part of them that may be stunted, may be broken. It helps them to rebuild trust and promotes intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is key in addiction. The person will have to find a desire to change sooner or later. And that's the only way that there will be change. Change that comes from within is more sustainable than change imposed from the outside. It's as simple as that. So we want to empower the client, and we use language that invites ownership of the client's lived experience. So you might ask questions like, what feels right for you now in this moment? Or, you've made a lot of decisions, so what led you to this one? Or something along the lines of, what kind of support do you want right now? In doing so, you are affirming the client's capacity to choose, even when they feel uncertain. You being there, reminding them that it's up to them to have the autonomy, to have the choice, to have the power, is extremely important. And so in so doing, we want to avoid advice giving. We want to avoid over direction. So instead of advising, we ask reflective questions. Instead of solving, we offer presence. We don't fix. We don't get caught in that fixing reflex. We say things, we avoid statements like, you should really do this, or I really want you to do that. Instead, we use reflective questions like, what options are you considering right now? Or, how do you want to handle this? And a client is going to grow stronger when they steer their own process. And we do that, and when the client does make a choice, we affirm their progress. We don't take credit and say, hey, I'm a great counselor, I'm causing change within you. You say to the client, hey, you are really making an effort. You are taking ownership. So when a client makes change, affirm their effort, affirm their ownership. You made that decision on your own and it's paid off. Congratulations. Or you followed your gut and look, it worked. So you would avoid implying that the change was because of your advice. You don't pat yourself on the back. The goal is to reinforce the client's agency, not to toot your own horn, as they say. So, autonomy versus ambivalence. Now, remember, ambivalence is a normal part of change. Clients may swing between hope and fear and commitment and doubt, but rather than pushing, just sit with that ambivalence and ask questions like, what's pulling you in each direction today? Or what would help you to decide between these two paths that you see before you? Remember, autonomy means trusting the client to work through that tension of ambivalence in their own pace. That's a huge part of what it means to be a good counselor. And as good counselors, you recognize that ambivalence is something that you can sit with, that you can spend time with, and that you can reinforce the autonomy of the client. And we do that by entering into conversations that reinforce that. So, for example, the client might say, everyone keeps telling me what to do and I am sick of it. And you as the counselor might just kind of reflect that back, where you say something like, you want to feel in control of your life again. And you know what? I get that. That makes sense. Or the client might say, I don't even know what I want anymore. And in that case, you embrace that ambivalence. And as a counselor, you might just say, that uncertainty is certainly part of finding your own voice again. So let's explore that together. And I hope you see within that these responses support both autonomy and emotional safety. We're honoring them and we're giving them their voice. They truly have their voice already, but we're not taking their voice away from them. And that's a key thing. So as we close out this lecture, there are 3 key terms I'd like to highlight. The first one is that whole idea of autonomy, and that is the right and capacity to make one's own choices. When we talk about intrinsic motivation, we're talking about that internal desire to change for personal reasons. It's not for what other people think the reason should be. It's for what matters to them, because what matters to them is the only thing that really matters when it comes to change. And self-efficacy is the belief in one's own ability to succeed. So which of the following best supports client autonomy? And I would suggest here that it would be the response, what direction feels right for you? That's a really great statement that supports client autonomy. So as we close out this lecture, I just want to remind you that supporting autonomy means believing in the client's ability to grow, even when they're unsure. Your job is not to control, but to collaborate. Not to lead, but to walk with. And so this week, as you are talking with people, listen for moments when you can give the power back to the person you're talking with. And let your presence say something like, I believe you can do this. Because that belief may be the beginning of everything that's important for that client. Hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you next week. You take care. Bye-bye.